Have you ever felt uncomfortable in your own skin? Felt that no matter what you did, you weren't skinny enough, pretty enough, or hot enough? Everyone has had their fair share of insecurities, but for some, such feelings manifest themselves into monsters with minds of their own. They appear when you look in the mirror, when you sit in front of your next meal, and on all the faces on social media. These monsters are known as eating disorders, a type of mental illness that severely affects one's eating behaviors and perceptions of their own bodies. I've had one of those monsters. My name is Emily Lee, and this is my story about my relationship with food and body image. Before anything else, it's important to establish what an eating disorder is. Eating disorders happen when a person has a negative perception of their own body image, bad enough for them to turn to drastic changes in eating and exercising habits to achieve their dream body. However, the perception of their own body is so distorted that they'll never be skinny enough. And so, it feeds into a vicious cycle where more and more drastic measures are taken until eventually there's an intervention or the disorder kills you. The symptoms of eating disorders vary case by case, however, are often classified into 3 different disorders. There's anorexia nervosa, where those affected experience behaviors such as extreme dieting, over-exercising, and fasting. There's bulimia nervosa, where those affected often consume excessive amounts of food only to throw it up afterwards. And finally, there's binge eating disorder, where an individual will eat large amounts of food in a short amount of time and feel extreme amounts of guilt afterwards. But eating disorders can manifest themselves into any combination of these symptoms and always have to do with negative perceptions of body image. There isn't always a definite source of where an eating disorder comes from, but mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, obsessive perfectionism, and trauma can increase the likelihood of one developing. Hence, the overwhelming amount of young women aged 15 to 24 who are affected by eating disorders, more so now than ever because of the overwhelming presence of social media. My story begins at the start of high school, back in grade 9. I had always had self-esteem issues, but they had never been bad as when the COVID lockdown happened. I used to practice rhythmic gymnastics throughout elementary and middle school, and although I wasn't very skinny, I still had quite a fit body. It being an athletics women's sport, even in a club full of children and young teenagers, there was a desire to be skinny and lean. At as young as 12 years of age, I was watching what I was eating, and I felt very self-conscious about how my legs, arms, stomach, calves, you name it, looked. In a room full of skinny girls, it felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb. And then I quit when the lockdown started. This did nothing but worsen my negative feelings I had towards how I looked. I had an overwhelming sense of guilt for not exercising as much and not being able to find the motivation in myself to do it. And I'm not sure how many of you can relate, but my mother has always been very critical about how I look. Asian mothers always know how to point out the worst parts of your body, the parts you're most insecure about, and make you feel awful about it. I had gained some weight because of the lockdown, having quit the sport that I was doing and living a more sedentary lifestyle, and my mother would not stop criticizing me for it. She would say phrases like, "Why are you eating so much? You're so fat already. Why are you eating this? Why are you eating that? Are you really going to go out dressed like that? Go change, you look fat." At the time, I took everything my mother said to me seriously and let every word cut deeper and deeper into my insecurities. And finally, there were my classmates. There were the girls with seemingly beautiful bodies constantly vocalizing their issues, and the Instagram posts of pretty teenage girls with their skinny waists, and worst of all, the people who thought it was funny to make fun of how you looked, how it was okay to just call you fat because, hey, it's just a joke, right? It's easy to write off the feelings I had as feelings of a stupid teenage girl, but when you're 14 years old, anything anyone says shapes how you feel and act. And so, I decided to act on it. I started skipping meals because the idea of eating 3 meals in a single day filled me to the brim with guilt. I stopped eating breakfast, and after some time, lunch as well. School only went on for 2 hours during that period of time, and my parents were always out of the house because of work. And so, for most of the day, I had to feed myself. In my mind, I didn't deserve to eat those meals because I wasn't as thin as I wanted to be. I rationalized it by telling myself that as soon as I hit my target weight, as soon as I was skinny enough, I would stop. That I would deserve to eat again, and I could go back to how things normally were. However, if you've ever experienced something like this, you know there's no such thing as skinny enough. It's really hard to imagine how difficult it was for me to eat at that time, but habitually skipping breakfast and lunch made my body reject eating anything that wasn't part of my normal schedule. My parents were always home on weekends, and so they always wanted me to eat lunch and dinner with them. And so I would always eat the food at the dinner table, only to throw it all up afterwards out of guilt. It was like a little monster sitting on my shoulder, telling me that I should be skinnier, and would fill me with an overwhelming sense of guilt whenever I ate, as though I was choking on the very food I was trying to eat. Yet, even after weeks and weeks, nothing felt like it worked. The person I saw in the mirror was the same ugly person I had seen weeks ago. Yet, I felt worse than ever before. My hair had started falling out, I felt weaker and weaker, and some days I felt so awful, I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed to go to school. I had a lot of absences during that time. I struggled to stay awake in my classes, and I found it difficult to keep my emotions in check. I lost a large number of my friends due to the jump from middle school to high school, and I wasn't exactly great at making them either. Adding to my loneliness, both my parents were extremely stressed from the lockdown, and having a teenage daughter with unimpressive grades and raging mood swings wasn't exactly great either. I would commonly argue with my father about the most menial of things, and when I would argue with my mom whenever we ate food and I didn't want to eat it. It felt as though the monster would control what I said, antagonizing anyone and everyone who stood in my way of reaching my ideal weight. I remember I would argue with my mother on almost a weekly basis because of my food intake. And at the time, I couldn't fathom the idea that she would only argue with me out of a place of worry. There was another underlying issue in play at the time. I've struggled with binge eating since middle school because of stress, and having a strained relationship with my parents as well as suboptimal grades, to say the least, caused me to binge eat on junk food to cope with any stressful situation that shot itself at me. I would eat to feel better, and only to have my monster on my shoulder tell me that I've just done the most disgusting act imaginable. And so I'd eat, and then I'd throw it all up or starve myself for the next day. I fed into that same vicious cycle for that entire winter. This all had a great toll on my physical and mental health. As previously mentioned, I was finding it harder and harder to stay awake during my days, and I often found myself lacking the energy to do many tasks. I felt lightheaded and dizzy, and I found it difficult to concentrate. In other words, I wasn't getting adequate nutrition or sustenance to support my body in its daily function. As for my mental health, I developed a great amount of anxiety surrounding my outward appearance and eating in public. I had a great fear of how others perceived me, and felt a great amount of shame whenever consuming food, and fed into my skewed idea of what my body image was. Along with this, I had started doing worse in school and found it incredibly hard to focus. I began feeling great amounts of incompetence, which only fed into my binge eating behaviors more, and I would go into long binges of food, followed by days of not eating. Then, in the spring of my grade 9 year, my sister had an intervention with me about my mental well-being. We talked about my relationship with my parents, my distinct lack of friends, how much time I spent cooped up in my room, talking to no one. At that time, I didn't tell her my struggles with my body image, but I found that sometimes to fix the big problems in your life, you have to fix the small ones first. So step by step, I spent my spring pulling myself together. What had helped me most was that my father had started working from home, and my mother started working more reasonable hours. We ate more meals together, and we talked over our disagreements more. I started spending more time focusing on my hobbies and schoolwork, and I even made some friends. Slowly, I began to heal from the monster that overtook my life for 9 months. That's not to say that the recovery was swift. It's been 3 years since I first started limiting my eating, and even now I'll occasionally succumb to the little monster on my shoulder telling me that I'm eating too much. I owe my recovery to the friends I had made and who has stuck by me since then. They didn't know the struggles I was facing, yet them existing as my support system gave me the courage to battle the struggles I had. The greatest advice to anyone considering extreme methods of weight control is please, don't. And to those who may be struggling with self-esteem and body image, please reach out to someone. It doesn't have to be a medical professional. It can be a friend, family member, or even a teacher, just someone you trust. Having a support system goes leaps and bounds when trying to improve your self-esteem. Now, one of the greatest hardships that I encountered in trying to heal my relationship with my body came with healing the relationship I had with my own mother. Now, it's easy to write off as a lot of the things she did as toxic, which in a sense, it was, but something I learned that I needed to understand in trying to understand her was that not everything is black and white, and there's a root to where my mother's behavior comes from. East Asia is famous for having the most toxic and unrealistic beauty standards. And having been raised in China for the first 35 years of her life, a woman, such beauty standards are cemented within her beliefs. In China, a woman is beautiful if she's tall, slender, has pale skin, big eyes, and a small face. Such standards were things that my mom felt that she had failed to reach in her life and had begun projecting onto me. Yet, my mother also put a great deal of care into making sure that I was eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Having grown up in poverty herself, she knows firsthand how awful it is to be hungry. And so she takes great pride in being able to send her children to bed with full bellies. I learned that although some of the comments she had made about my weight were distasteful, she's more concerned that I'm living a healthy and happy lifestyle. I'd say to anyone who's struggling with body image to turn their gazes away from that of social media and all the unrealistic standards of today's society, and instead find a way to embrace the parts of themselves that they find beautiful. There's nothing wrong with wanting to improve yourself, whether it be to work out more and achieve a better body, or improve one's diet to live a healthier lifestyle. The goal to any pursuit is to bettering one's body image should always result in your own happiness, and not at the cost of your health. It's important to decide what you think is beautiful and achieving it through self-improvement and living a healthy life. Eating disorders are not to be glorified as necessary sacrifices made for beauty, and instead, beauty should be achieved through acceptance, improvement, and growth. Thank you.